It's U of L Today on 93.9 The Ville. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
And welcome to U of L Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. So glad you're joining us. But before we get to those guests, a couple of news tidbits for you. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry recently praised U of L as one of the top producers of Fulbright scholars in the United States. U of L has 14 recent graduates who won Fulbrights and will study or teach abroad in the coming year. And also, we learned that the University of Louisville is among the top 100 universities in the world that were granted U.S. utility patents for 2015. U of L had 25 of those patents in fiscal year 2015. So good news worldwide from the University of Louisville. So coming up, what do we have on the show today? Students from U of L fanned out across the globe this summer on international learning and study abroad trips, and one of those students is a McConnell scholar who spent some time in China, and we'll talk to him about that experience. And how do children learn about property rights, generosity, and how to handle money during their development? A U of L professor is doing research on those things, and we'll talk to him as well. But first, he's the personal physician for the Dalai Lama, traveling around the world to teach meditation and compassion in medicine. He's Barry Kurzen, and he's in Louisville to speak to the incoming class of students at the U of L School of Medicine. In fact, Barry, you've already done that, haven't you? You already talked to the students at U of L.
I have. I'm finishing my week, and tomorrow I'm leaving.
Very good. Barry Kurzen, as we said, is the personal physician for the Dalai Lama. And for those of you who can't see him, he is dressed appropriately in what do you call the garb that you're dressed in?
Well, these are Tibetan Buddhist monks' robes. They're red or dark red, kind of maroon color. And to describe how they actually look is difficult. You got to look at a picture somewhere.
Yeah, and you can probably find it online pretty easily. How did a guy from the University of Washington years ago get to be a Buddhist monk and then the personal physician for the Dalai Lama? How did all that happen?
Mark, I don't know. I pinch myself a lot. It didn't happen one fell swoop. It was a gradual, stepwise process. So I was teaching at the University of Washington in the School of Medicine, and a friend of mine came back from a place in northern India called Dharamsala, which is the kind of headquarters of the Tibetans in exile who had to leave their country, about 150,000 of them. And the Dalai Lama lives there. And there was a meeting in the middle 80s where the Dalai Lama, a small meeting of kind of scientists and the Dalai Lama. And in that meeting, he said he would like a Western-trained physician to come to Dharamsala to interdigitate different healthcare systems.
That's a big word. I don't know what that means.
Well,
okay.
Yeah, I'll tell you what it means. I don't know what it means either.
But anyway, so you meet up with this guy.
Yeah, so then, to make all these different healthcare systems available for any sick person. Basically, that's what it meant. So I went over there, spent a couple months, met the people, and I thought, wow, this is incredible. Went back to the university, took about a year to give all my responsibilities away, and then I went over there thinking I'd be there 6 months, and now it's been 27, going on 28 years.
Wow. And you became a monk, and also you are still a physician, so you're still keeping up on your all the training classes and all the things you have to do to remain a physician, correct?
Yes, that's correct. I'm still accredited. I have my license based in California, and I practice charitable medicine. In the last number of years, it's been part-time, very part-time, because my major activity is teaching globally, as you mentioned, but all my medical work is done charitable, has been for 27 years. When people who are poor need medicines, sometimes I help them purchase the medicines for them.
Very good. So you're doing some good work other than working for the Dalai Lama. I guess what most people I think are going to ask is if you're the personal physician for the Dalai Lama, here's a guy that travels all around the world. Are you by his side? Obviously you're not today, but are you by his side at every beck and call if he comes down with a cough tomorrow? Are you going to have to fly to Antarctica or someplace to check him out?
Yes.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Is that how that works?
Yeah, that's how it works. We have a couple of us, a very small team, just a couple of us.
Okay.
We're always in touch. So if there is something that comes up urgently, I go immediately. Fortunately, he's been extremely healthy. We've had some minor health issues. All that stuff is planned. And then, of course, I travel with him. So that happens primarily in the States and in India, where we get healthcare checkups and stuff like that. Sometimes in Europe, right. Sometimes in Japan.
And the current Dalai Lama, I think, is 80 or 81 years old, right?
Yes, he's 81 years old. Just was this month on the 6th.
Birthday boy, huh?
Yeah, 6th of July.
Well, how's his health?
His health is incredible. So he travels about half the time, and he goes with a team of about 8-10 people, some security, secretaries, translators, etc. And after a 3 or 4 week trip, they get back. His team, most of them are about half or maybe 2/3 his age, they're exhausted. So a few weeks later, he goes again. He has another team. The teams rotate, but he keeps going.
The 80-year-old guy keeps on ticking, huh? We're talking with Dr. Barry Kurzen, who is the personal physician for the Dalai Lama, as you just heard, and he's in Louisville to speak to, and he has spoken to, the incoming class of medical school students at the University of Louisville. What'd you tell them? What'd you tell those kids?
Yeah.
Well, I'm calling them kids. They're students at the University of
They
Louisville.
are kids. They're young.
Yeah,
they're
younger than me and you, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Most of us went or go into medicine because we want to help. And the research shows that after about the 3rd year of studying medicine, that feeling of wanting to help others gets kind of squunched out. There's so much stress and busyness and responsibility and things to learn that the students kind of forget that. That's what the research shows. So I made them aware of that, and I made them aware of techniques that they can adopt to try to prevent that change in their original intention of going into medicine, how to keep it more alive, or at least, if we're too busy for a few years, recognize that it's there, and when things lighten up a little bit, to come back to it. So basically teaching them how to not forget that and how to, train it up and cultivate it even more.
And you talk a lot about compassion. Talk about that a little bit. What you tell not just students that are going into med school, but others. What do you espouse?
Compassion is really the meaning of life. And compassion, in the sense that I'm using it, means to help, first to wish, and then when we're able, to engage in reducing pain and suffering. And as doctors, that's really what we're all about, what we're supposed to be all about. And sometimes we forget, and we think we're all about looking at images and numbers from the lab and things like that. But in fact, we're all about reducing and alleviating suffering. And that's compassion. So compassion is actually what I call a win-win situation. And I am an older guy now, and one of the things that I've learned in my life, I haven't learned a lot, but one of the things that I've learned is that when you encounter a win-win situation, go for it, because there aren't many of them out there. So it's win-win in the sense that if you have the desire, the concern for the well-being of others, and then you try to engage in best you can, making that a reality, that helps the other people. If you do it well, sometimes we blow it, and that's okay too. But when you do it well, the other people, they benefit. But the other thing that sometimes we forget is that we also are recipients. The feeling when you're helping others is remarkable. Money can't buy it. And even billionaires who don't have this, their lives are often miserable because of it.
The University of Louisville and the University of Louisville School of Medicine has a program going on trying to teach compassion and to teach their future doctors and nurses and others to be more compassionate. And we often talk about bedside manner of doctors and nurses and others. What have you found as you've gone around the United States? Is that getting better or worse in the healthcare system in the United States? The, quote, bedside manner of doctors and nurses.
I think it's getting better. And the reason I say this is that young people are beginning to get keyed in to compassion, to meditation, to recognizing an inner life. And when we recognize thoughts and feelings that are harmful or negative, they're becoming courageous and they're starting to look at that stuff. They don't suppress it, but they're starting to learn techniques to change it, to transform it into more positive ways of life. 5-10 years ago when I taught this to medical students, they were checked out. They were on their devices, they were asleep, they were talking. I don't find that anymore. They're engaged by their questions, they know about this stuff. So I think we're kind of on the cusp of change. I think it is happening with many of our medical students, out in the hospitals and in clinics. It'll take a few more years before these people get in there and then get into positions of a little bit of influence so they can have some influence on how the hospital and the clinics are run and bring some of this compassion into those systems.
Was there anything that struck you about your visit with the University of Louisville Medical School students, or have you done a number of these similar white coat ceremonies that that you find these 22, 23-year-olds that are bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to roll? Have you found anything that you can tell them or anything that they tell you that helps you, perhaps?
Yes. Well, I think what I found here with the white coat ceremony, the incoming freshmen, the first-year medical students, is a freshness, is an openness. I mean, I was looking around the room when I was talking to these 154 students plus their families, and I didn't see anybody sleeping. I didn't see anybody looking around or talking to their neighbors. It was amazing. They were engaged in this. They want this stuff. So that's pretty unique. I mean, not unique, but it's, uncommon here at University of Louisville School of Medicine. And I think part of the reason, or much of the credit, of course it goes to the students, but it also goes to the administration. The dean, Toni Grancel, she's amazing. She's really passionate about bringing compassion into medical education. Some of her team, Vice Dean for Research, Dr. John Klein, he's also instituting and teaching some of these classes on compassion. These people are turned on. They realize the benefit in their own personal lives, let alone the benefit in the lives of the patients.
All right, we need to wrap this up, but I got one more question for you. You've spent close to a week in Louisville. What's been your impression of the people and the things to see and do in Louisville?
Well, the people are incredible, very warm, very welcoming. Even people on the streets, if I was lost, so that was quite amazing. I had an incredible time yesterday at Gethsemane, spending some time with brothers Lawrence and Paul in Thomas Merton's little retreat house out back, talking about reality and love. It was incredibly enriching. That's a fabulous place. Today I'm being taken just after here to the Muhammad Ali Museum, and we're going to meet some of the people over there. I really look forward. It's a great place.
You'll really like that.
And I was out in a little bit of the countryside along the river in some friends' homes, which were just fabulous.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad you had a good excursion here. Is this the first time you've been to Louisville?
First time, but they're
Come back.
They're already inviting me back.
Come back.
I'll be back.
Come back. And you said you had a good visit with the mayor too, right?
Fantastic. We had two lovely visits. After a visit 6 months ago in Minnesota, he's a remarkable individual. The people of Louisville are incredibly fortunate to have Greg Fisher as their mayor.
And you even said Louisville correctly, so we're very proud of you for being able to do that. All right. Barry Kurzen, appreciate you being in Louisville, and thanks for coming on the show. Landon Lauder is a McConnell Scholar at the University of Louisville, one of only, I guess there's 40 of them each year, or a little bit more than that. One of the perks of being a McConnell Scholar is you get a trip to China in your junior year for a summer learning experience, and that's where Landon spent some time this summer. He's here to talk about that China trip and being a McConnell Scholar and just being a student at the University of Louisville. So welcome, Landon.
Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here. All right, well, let's tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? How'd you get to UofL? Those kinds of things.
So I'm from a small town right outside of Ashland, Kentucky, which is far eastern Kentucky on the border, West Virginia and Ohio. I, of course, looked at many schools for college, as one does. But what really attracted me to UofL was that it was just something different when you stepped on campus. It was a much more home-like feel. The people treated you like one of their own. A lot of the other colleges didn't really have that kind of ambiance to it, and so I really fell in love with Louisville at that point.
And then you applied for the McConnell Scholarship and got it, so that was a big deal.
Yeah, so that was definitely the
was that the topper?
It sealed the deal. Mm-hmm.
It sealed the deal. So tell us what a McConnell Scholar is. I think a lot of people listening to the show might know what a McConnell Scholar is, but how would you describe it in your terms when you talk to your friends or acquaintances? What do you tell them about it?
Well, first, I'd like to point out the McConnell Center is nonpartisan at its core. So the mission is not to, it's nothing political. It's all academic. So it's exposing students to different kinds of thought and schools of thought and different kind of histories, philosophies, political theory, those sorts of things. McConnell Scholars are typically really high-achieving students. We are at the head of student government, at the head of student activity boards all across campus. We're high achievers.
Are you a political science?
Yeah.
So a lot of them are in political science, too.
We have to minor in political science. That's a requirement, but most of us end up majoring as well, and some of us have double majors. In addition to that.
All right. And you get, what is it, free tuition, room board? What's the scholarship that you get?
It's free tuition plus a stipend to help pay for those kinds of needs.
Room board and other stuff. All right. Well, you got, as part of the deal of being a McConnell Scholar, you got to go to China
Yes.
over the summer. Tell us about it.
So it's a month-long program. We go to 3 different cities. So we start out in Shanghai, then we go to Xi'an, and then end up in Beijing. And we spend about a week in each city, except for Beijing. We spend 2 weeks because there's just so much to do in Beijing, with that being the capital. And basically, it's kind of a multi-tiered program. So there's an academic component. We visited a lot of the universities in those cities and took classes from both Chinese professors and Dr. Hua, who's a political science faculty here at the University of Louisville. And of course, just the social aspect of it, getting to bond with the class of McConnell Scholars. That was a really nice experience. And then, having to do the tourist part, of course, get to see all the different sites and the history. We're shown around with student guides, so they kind of help us understand the history and implications of all these kind of different places in China.
And you went to, are all 3 cities big? Obviously Shanghai is, but are all 3 cities really big cities?
By China standards, yes. By our standards, they're massive, unbelievably large.
Right.
So Shanghai and Beijing both hover around 30 million plus. And Xi'an, they consider a small city. And just to put that in perspective, it's about 9 million people, which is just about the population of New York, our largest city.
Right, New York City.
So,
So
to them, that's a smaller city, but yeah.
Did you get out in the hinterlands of China at all? Did you get out in the rural areas?
No, not much. We mostly stayed in the city. Some of our excursions did take us to the outside skirts of the city, obviously, but we didn't really venture out into the country at all.
What'd you learn? You were there for a month. What'd you learn?
Politically, Chinese-U.S. relations are a lot better than what people perhaps perceive, especially in this election cycle. I don't think personally there's much to worry about Chinese-U.S. relations in that regard. The Chinese students were very receptive, very hospitable. We couldn't have been treated better. It was so phenomenal. The care they showed us around China with, and they really took us to the great places to eat and told us all sorts of neat stuff about their lives. And overall, China, the cities differed. So some people think of China as a relatively underdeveloped country. And for some parts, that's true. But in cities like Shanghai, you have no idea you're in Shanghai because it's almost like New York. It's so commercial. It's so modern. You could go around the corner and there's an H&M or a McDonald's. Xi'an's a little different. Some of the Chinese described it as a little behind. And it's just kind of the standard, just a very basic city, I guess you would call it.
Okay. We're talking with Landon Lauder, who's a McConnell Scholar and soon to be a senior at the University of Louisville, talking about his trip to China. In the United States, for those of us who haven't been to China, we always think of it as a closed society, no free press, those kinds of things. What did you find in terms of, comparing perhaps our democracy and what we have here to how the daily life of a Chinese citizen is in China?
Well, there's an interesting split there that we noticed when we went over to China and talked with the student guides. It seems the student guides who have access to English, they speak English, they most likely have been to a Western country to study, typically do have access to a lot of Western media, Western social media especially, but the average Chinese citizen doesn't. And so we're not really sure because we didn't spend that much time in China to figure it out, but there's some kind of divide between the access to English in the West and not having access. We definitely did not have Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any kind of access like that.
All right. Well, Landon Lauder, congratulations on being a McConnell Scholar, first off, because it's a rigorous process to get there, and good luck in your senior year.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Landon Lauder, McConnell Scholar, and soon to be senior at the University of Louisville. Nick Knowles is a psychology professor in the College of Arts and Sciences at UofL, and he's a faculty favorite, meaning that the students nominated him as one of their favorite teachers, which is a good thing. He also does research on how children learn concepts. Well, welcome, Nick. First off, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so you're a psychology professor. So what do you teach? What are the things you teach?
So I'm a developmental psychologist, but I also have a background in sort of perception and vision. So I teach cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, and I'm happy to be one of the professors that teaches the introductory course. So I get to
You're dealing with freshmen or
sophomores? I get to meet everybody now that I do that. So.
Okay. And you said you're also in charge of some center for kids or something.
So I'm one of the co-directors of the Knowledge and Development Lab, the Kid Lab here at UofL. And
what is that?
So we do all kinds of research on how kids think and learn. I collaborate with Dr. Judith Danovich, who's another faculty member in the department, and she studies a lot about how kids know what other people know. That's a very interesting thing, but how do you know who to ask for advice and things like that? And I study a variety of things, but I spend most of my time studying concepts of ownership and property and how those emerge and develop over time in children.
In children. So when you're talking ownership and property, like that toy is mine, is that ownership and property? What are you talking about here?
So mine appears at about age 1.5, and less than 6 months later, kids are understanding something about property and who can own the property, so they can identify owners. Then they can link property with those owners and keep track of it. And in fact, they're really good at that task.
That's
right?
Billy's ball.
Exactly. So, kids say, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. But if you really, have a nicely designed experiment, you can show they really know, they know what's theirs and they know what's not theirs, typically. So I study how those concepts build up and get more complicated and expand to other things.
So are all kids about the same at a 1.5 old, that they start learning the same concepts at a 1.5 of that's mine, that's Billy's, that's Susie's? Are they all the same at 1.5? And then when do they start changing to have different concepts of who owns what?
So actually, the sorts of concepts that I study with respect to property and ownership are pretty consistent. So almost every kid, by the time they're 1.5, starts to say mine. They have a representation of yours at about the same time, although they care a little less about that.
Of course they do.
And there's a couple of transitions. So there's this transition from sort of self to other. So they start out being really good at keeping track of their own stuff and defending their own stuff better than other people's stuff. And then they get better and better at sort of linking other people to things. And like I said, they're best at taking a thing and putting it with a person and keeping it there. So one of the weaknesses that children have is when property moves from one person to another person. So they're actually quite bad at that, and bad at that until later than you would think. So I've had 9-year-olds who sort of conserve property with the same person.
What do you mean by that?
So for example, if I have something and I give it to you.
Okay, it's a present.
Yep.
Or you, it's a baseball bat. And you
present is a very special word.
All right, well, let's back up then.
Yeah,
so you give me a baseball bat.
Right, or I
say,
sell it to you.
I don't need this anymore. Mm-hmm. You can have it.
Exactly. So I give it to you, I sell it to you, and you take children, mostly children under 9, although 9-year-olds do it a little as well, and you say, I have this, I'm going to give it to Mark, and you say, who owns it? And a big proportion of the time they say, oh, you still own it, even though you gave it to him.
So they don't understand.
So they're not very good at that part. So that is sort of where my work is going, right? Because ownership starts as this interpersonal thing where I keep track of these things and I don't violate the boundaries between your property and my property because it's an extension of you, right? So that'll affect our relationship. There'll be consequences for me if I take the wrong computer bag from this room, then there's a consequence there and a pretty bad social consequence. So a lot of early what you're doing is managing interpersonal relationships. And things like that. In fact, parents tell you share. Mm-hmm. But in fact, that's not how the rules work, right? I never have to share any of my stuff ever as an adult,
because
right?
it's mine.
Exactly. If you ask to borrow my car, I can just say no. But we don't say this is yours and you never have to share it.
But isn't
right?
that a good thing for parents, though? For the parents who are listening,
mm-hmm.
shouldn't they be telling their kid to share and be compassionate and help other children?
100%. So what you're doing though is when you're telling children to share, what you're doing is you're building up prosociality, right? Be nice to other people, be a good helper. Be fair, be equitable. And kids love all that. So they like things to be evenly distributed. Mm-hmm. They like things to be fairly distributed. In fact, kids will accept a loss to keep things from being unfair, right? And so that's one of the things we're sort of currently in development and studying right now. But on one hand, that's really good, right? But the interesting thing is if kids are just learning about ownership and property from their parents, then they should be really promiscuous with their sharing, right? So they should not care who the property belongs to. You should just give it to everybody. It shouldn't be a big deal. But they're really good at tracking. So they're not fooled by all this share business. They really know the rules.
Right.
But telling kids to share is teaching a different. It's not teaching about ownership and property. It's teaching about how you interact with other people in sort of close relationships.
All right. We're talking with Nick Knowles, who's a psychology professor at the University of Louisville, and he does a lot of kid psychology. That's what I'm going to call it anyways. What does this mean for parents? What can parents take out of your research and what you teach about what they should say to their children to make sure that they're well-adjusted and understand property rights and how to be compassionate and sharing and all those kinds of things by the time they're teenagers?
So that's a great question. So one thing is that adults typically focus on the interpersonal, be nice to your friends sort of stuff. And that's totally fine because the conservation, this is mine and that's yours, kids get that with no help. Mm-hmm. So for that part, adults don't have to do anything. Kids are great at that. Now, there is a really big gap, like I said, between moving property between individuals. And I think that's actually a huge challenge and actually one that adults don't address. So kids live in this sort of qualified environment. If you know any slightly bigger kids, you know that sometimes they take things to school and they will give it to someone else. And then a teacher can just undo that, or an adult can undo that, right? So they don't have the full, if I gave you something, it would stick. But if a child gave something to someone else, it doesn't stick. So they have this mixed input, and that's a challenge to overcome. The other thing is the tendency to have property stick with a person is actually a problem when you want to start participating in economic behavior, so like buying things, right?
Right.
So all the things you do to be a good friend and to share and things like that, you actually need to learn to suspend that to be a good sort of economic actor,
and
right?
A manager of money. And
Exactly.
those kinds of things,
To develop financial literacy, you have to push down these interpersonal things that are about helping relationships
Well, not
build.
a mixed message to kids? I
It
mean,
is. 100% it is. And actually, so we're doing,
Are we doing a disservice to our kids
well, think
by
what
telling
you
them to be
will.
nice?
No, well, that's the question, right? So I think actually that's an empirical question. We don't know.
Okay.
I do know one thing. I do know that the Common Core is having economic education added as a piece that is actually sort of something you teach kids. And that's because financial literacy is really poor in kids most of the time. And I think that this link of being bad at sort of economic exchanges when you're little, so that's the place where you can work on something. You don't need to work on tracking who owns what or something like that, but you do need to work on moving things between people and learning, starting even earlier than we do, about economic interactions. And I actually have a nice developing collaboration with the Louisville branch of the St. Louis Fed, trying to look at some of the specific things you need to develop financial literacy, and then working with their economic education specialist to see if we can't make some materials to teach this in a classroom and actually get some sort of financial literacy and economic education bump as part of regular classroom education.
All right. Well, let me ask the last question here. We got to wrap this up. So what would you say, or what would you perhaps tell the rest of the world are the things we're not doing well as parents to get the kid that is 17 or 18 years old, has great financial literacy, understands his pocketbook, understands economic issues, but is also very good at sharing, generosity, those kinds of things? How do you have that well-rounded kid at 18?
I think it's really, I think people in general know the things they need to do to make a good citizen if they want to. But I think that there is a gap in education in those other things you're talking about. So I think that kids don't come out knowing about their pocketbook and balancing, how to vote, right? We have a real civic and financial gap in how to handle those things, how to get a loan by yourself, right? So 20-somethings these days have a parent that helps them do that. So I think the real gap there is sort of the financial education gap, rather than the sort of pro-social, be a good person. I think we're doing a great job at be a good person. We're doing a poor job at be a good consumer and a responsible manager of your money.
All right, very good. Nick Knowles, psychology professor at UofL. Thanks for tuning in, and go Cards.